Dr. Vexthani had seen enough primitive death fantasies to last 3 lifetimes, which was unfortunate since Zenthri lived for 12. The Xenoarchaeology Department's latest acquisition, a collection of human cultural artifacts recovered from their third planet, sat spread across a laboratory like the fevered dreams of a species that had apparently spent most of its evolutionary cycle imagining increasingly creative ways to annihilate itself. Listen to this one, called Professor Quindar from across the sterile chamber, his translator struggling with the archaic human syntax. They built something called a Zarbomba that could allegedly flatten entire cities, then decided it was too powerful and never use again. What kind of species develops a weapon and then gets scared of their own creation? The kind that also wrote instruction manuals for building planet-killing space fortresses and called them entertainment, Vexthani replied, scrolling through another batch of human fiction. Apparently, they had an entire genre dedicated to imagining wars between star systems. Death Star's world devastators, something called a culture GSV. Their creativity with theoretical genocide was genuinely impressive. The Zenthri Empire had been cataloging the mythologies of primitive species for over 6,000 years. It was useful work, in its way, understanding how pre-spaceflight civilizations conceptualized power and conflict provided valuable insights into their eventual diplomatic approaches. Most species followed predictable patterns. Sea-dwelling races dreamed of controlling weather, mountain peoples fantasized about flying, and desert cultures inevitably developed elaborate water-based magic systems. Humans, as usual, had missed the memo on being normal. They also wrote extensively about something called mutually assured destruction, continued Quindar, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he processed the translation. Apparently, they reached a point where they could end their own civilization several times over, so they all agreed not to do it. Then they kept building more weapons anyway. Charming, Vexthani muttered, making notes in the Cultural Assessment Database. File it under paradoxical thinking patterns and cross-reference with the Gekorian suicide cults. At least the Gekorians had the courtesy to actually follow through with their death wishes. The laboratory communication console chimed with an incoming priority message. Vexthani ignored it. Probably another request from the Military Archaeological Division asking her to rush analysis on some recently discovered ruins. The Zenthri expansion fleet had been encountering more dead civilizations lately, and everyone wanted to know what killed them before they made the same mistakes. "Oh, this is interesting," Quindar said, pulling up a holographic display of human textual fragments. They apparently believed their planet was being watched by advanced alien civilizations. Multiple references to first contact protocols and elaborate speculations about how technologically superior species would approach primitive worlds. Standard developing species paranoia, Vexthani replied without looking up, though their methodical approach is somewhat unusual. Most pre-contact cultures assume aliens will either worship them as gods or eat them as snacks. Humans seem to have spent considerable time thinking about the practical logistics of interstellar diplomacy. The communication console chimed again, more insistently this time. Vexthani finally activated the display, expecting to see the standard military priority tag. Instead, she found herself staring at Admiral Korthes of Deep Space Monitoring Command, whose usually composed expression looked like someone had just explained quantum mechanics to a particularly dim asteroid. "Dr. Vexthani," the Admiral said, his voice carrying that special tone reserved for delivering news that would probably ruin everyone's day, "I need you to stop whatever you're doing and tell me everything you know about human military capabilities." "Human what now?" Vexthani blinked, glancing at the scattered artifacts around her laboratory. "Admiral, humans are extinct. Have been for approximately 200 standard years. We're studying their mythology for the cultural archives." "No," Admiral Korthes said slowly, "they are not." The laboratory's main display activated without being prompted, showing a live feed from Deep Space Station Omega 7. In the center of the screen, drifting through space with the casual confidence of a predator that had never encountered anything capable of threatening it, was a ship. Calling it a ship, however, was like calling a hurricane a light breeze. The thing was roughly the size of Zen-3 Prime's smaller moon, constructed from materials that seemed to absorb and reflect light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Its surface was covered with structures that might have been weapons, sensors, or abstract art installations, assuming abstract art installations were typically designed to project an aura of barely contained apocalyptic violence. It appeared 3 hours ago, the Admiral continued, his voice growing more strained with each word. No hyperspace signature, no energy buildup, no warning. One moment that section of space was empty. The next moment this thing was just there, broadcasting on frequencies we didn't know existed. Professor Quindar had abandoned his translation work and was now staring at the display with the expression of someone whose worldview was undergoing rapid and uncomfortable renovation. That design architecture, he whispered, those proportional relationships. Vexthani felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach, like a meal that had disagreed with her on a fundamental level. She turned back to her human mythology files, fingers moving with urgent precision as she pulled up the entertainment archives. Star destroyers, superstar destroyers, Eclipse-class dreadnoughts. The match wasn't exact, but the underlying design philosophy was unmistakable. Humans had apparently spent centuries imagining exactly what kind of ship they would build when they wanted to ensure that first contact left an impression. Admiral, she said carefully, what exactly is that thing broadcasting? The Admiral's expression somehow managed to become even more unsettling. Mathematical proofs, physics demonstrations, and what appears to be a comprehensive analysis of our current military capabilities, including several technologies we haven't shared with anyone outside the Inner Council. On the display, the human dreadnought continued its stately drift through space, patient as a mountain and twice as immovable. Somewhere in its vast bulk, the descendants of the species that had written detailed manuals for planetary siege warfare were presumably waiting to see how the galaxy would react to their arrival. Vexthani looked at the scattered human artifacts on her laboratory tables, the stories, the technical manuals disguised as fiction, the elaborate speculations about alien contact protocols, and realized she had been studying not mythology but blueprints. The mythology department, it seemed, was about to get a very practical education. The emergency session of the Galactic Coordination Assembly had devolved into what could charitably be described as organized chaos, assuming one's definition of organized included 7 different species shouting at each other in 12 different languages, while a holographic projection of humanity's moon-sized calling card rotated serenely in the chamber center. Ambassador Thekmor of the Keshri Collective was the first to attempt establishing meaningful communication, which surprised absolutely no one who had dealt with Keshri before. Their species approached every problem with mathematical precision, viewing the universe as an elegant equation that simply required the correct variables to solve. We have transmitted the Fibonacci sequence, prime number progressions, and the fundamental constant of physics, Thekmor announced to the Assembly, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated supreme confidence. Any intelligence capable of interstellar travel will recognize these universal truths and respond with appropriate mathematical acknowledgement. The response in the human vessel had arrived within 17 minutes, a complete proof of the Riemann hypothesis, followed by solutions to 6 other millennium problems that had stumped galactic mathematics for centuries, and then, just to show off, a casual demonstration of how to calculate pi to infinite decimal places without using infinite computational resources. The Keshri had gone very quiet after that. Mathematical posturing means nothing, growled War Chief Grexel of the Vorthak hegemony, his massive frame making the assembly chamber's furniture look like children's toys. They want to establish dominance through intellectual displays? Fine. We shall respond with strength. The Vorthack had immediately dispatched their 3 most intimidating battle cruisers to perform traditional threat assessment maneuvers around the human ship. Aggressive flyby patterns designed to gauge an opponent's defensive capabilities and psychological responses to potential violence. The human Dreadnought had observed these maneuvers with what could only be described as polite interest, then had proceeded to demonstrate its own capabilities by casually rearranging the molecular structure of a nearby asteroid, transforming it from ordinary space rock into a perfect sculpture of the Vorthack honor symbol. The transformation had required manipulating matter at the quantum level while maintaining artistic composition, a feat that violated several known laws of physics while simultaneously showing impeccable cultural sensitivity. War Chief Grexanael was currently drinking heavily and muttering about early retirement. The Quillen Commercial Syndicate had taken a more pragmatic approach, immediately opening trade negotiations through their most experienced diplomatic merchant, Zalindra. The Quillen understood that any civilization capable of building ships of that magnitude must have resources worth acquiring, and they approached first contact the way they approached everything else, as a potential business opportunity. "We have offered standard trade packages," Zalindra reported, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who had never met a deal she couldn't improve. Rare minerals, technological exchanges, cultural artifacts, territorial agreements, the complete spectrum of commercial diplomacy. The human ship had responded by transmitting detailed blueprints for fusion reactors that operated at 97% efficiency, followed by the molecular formulas for materials that could apparently maintain structural integrity at temperatures approaching stellar cores. As a bonus, they had included what appeared to be the complete genetic sequences for 17 extinct Quillen delicacies that had been lost during the Great Famine Wars 3 centuries ago. Zalindra was currently calculating exactly how much money her species would make from those reactor designs alone, and the numbers were causing her to make soft, whimpering sounds. "Perhaps we should consider a different approach," suggested Counselor Yithandra, the ethereal convergence, her translucent form shifting through colors that indicated deep philosophical contemplation. "This ship clearly represents a civilization that has transcended our understanding of technological limitations. We should engage with them on a spiritual level, consciousness to consciousness." The ethereals had attempted to establish psychic contact through meditation techniques that had successfully bridged gaps between dozens of telepathic species. They had projected thoughts of universal harmony, cosmic understanding, and the fundamental interconnectedness of all sentient beings. The human response had been a gentle but firm psychic equivalent of, "Please hold while we transfer your call to the appropriate department," followed by what appeared to be an incredibly detailed psychological profile of ethereal society, including several observations about their mating rituals that were both accurate and embarrassing. Counselor Yithandra had spent the last 2 hours alternating between impressed admiration and mortified horror. "The pattern is becoming clear," observed Director Cole Hassan of Central Intelligence, his multifaceted eyes clicking as they focus on different aspects of the tactical display. "This human vessel is not simply responding to our contact attempts. It is demonstrating comprehensive knowledge of our capabilities, our cultures, and our psychological frameworks. Each response has been precisely calibrated to exceed our expectations while remaining just uncomfortable enough to establish clear superiority." Admiral Corthes nodded grimly from his position at the tactical console. "Our deep space monitoring stations have been analyzing the ship's passive sensor sweeps. It is simultaneously scanning our entire fleet deployment, mapping our planetary defense networks, and cataloging the genetic diversity of our agricultural systems, all while maintaining what appears to be casual conversation with 4 different species." Ambassador Thekmore's crystalline form flickered with colors indicating mathematical anxiety. "The computational power required for such multitasking suggests processing capabilities that exceed our theoretical maximums by several orders of magnitude. Are we certain this is a ship and not some form of distributed artificial intelligence. Unknown, the Admiral replied, but our xenoarchaeology department has been analyzing human cultural artifacts. According to Dr. Vextani's preliminary assessment, humans appear to have spent significant time developing theoretical frameworks for exactly this type of first contact scenario. The assembly chamber fell silent, except for the soft humming of translation matrices and the occasional concerned clicking from various species' nervous systems. They planned this, War Chief Grexel said finally, his voice carrying the defeated tone of someone who had just realized he had brought a knife to a philosophy fight. Somehow, they planned for all of us. On the tactical display, the human Dreadnought continued its patient orbit, waiting for the galaxy to finish processing the implications of its arrival. Deep in its vast hull, whatever passed for humanity these days was presumably taking notes on galactic first contact protocols and finding them charmingly primitive. The Galactic Coordination Assembly was beginning to suspect that humanity had not stumbled into interstellar politics. They had been studying for the entrance exam for centuries. The transmission arrived at 0800 Standard Galactic Time, delivered with the casual efficiency of someone placing an order at their favorite restaurant. It materialized simultaneously on every communication device across 17 different star systems, bypassing security protocols that had taken centuries to develop and ignoring encryption methods that were theoretically unbreakable. Greetings, the message began, accompanied by a three-dimensional hologram of what appeared to be an elderly human female, wearing clothing that managed to look both practical and vaguely ceremonial. We apologize for the extended silence, but we were busy cataloging your various contact attempts and cross-referencing them with our cultural preparation files. Quite thorough work. By the way, you exceeded our projections for diplomatic creativity by approximately 12%. Captain Velterra of the merchant vessel Prophet's Edge was the first to recover from the shock of receiving unsolicited communication from a ship that had just spent 3 days making the galaxy's most advanced civilizations look like enthusiastic amateurs. "This is Captain Velterra of the Free Trader Collective," she responded, activating her ship's most sophisticated translation matrix. "We welcome you to this sector of space and offer our services for any commercial needs you might have." The human's holographic representation smiled with a sort of expression that suggested she found Velterra's eagerness both endearing and slightly amusing. How delightfully straightforward. "Yes, we do have some commercial interests, though perhaps not quite what you're expecting." What followed was a list. Not a simple list. That would have been too mundane for a species that apparently considered violating the laws of physics a form of casual conversation. This was a comprehensive catalog that began with reasonable requests and gradually escalated into demands that required the assembled representatives to completely recalibrate their understanding of interstellar economics. "We would like to acquire samples of Zenthary quantum crystalline matrices," the human continued, her tone suggesting she was reading from a grocery list rather than requesting materials that cost more than most planetary defense budgets. "Additionally, we're interested in Vorthack bioenhancement serums, Quillen probability computation devices, and approximately 17 different varieties of Keshri mathematical art installations." Zalindra, still calculating the potential profits from the reactor blueprints humanity had casually provided, leaned forward with the expression of someone who had just heard opportunity knock. "These items can certainly be arranged, though the collective value would be substantial. What do you offer in exchange?" The human's smile widened. "We have prepared several trade packages based on your species' various technological limitations and cultural preferences. Would you prefer to review them individually, or shall we begin with a general overview?" What appeared on the screens next caused several species to temporarily lose the ability to process coherent thought. The humans were offering gravitational manipulation technology that could terraform planets in decades rather than millennia. They had developed medical treatments that could extend lifespans across multiple species by factors of 3 to 5. Their computational systems could apparently process the economic data of entire galactic sectors in real time, optimizing trade routes and resource allocation with precision that made existing commercial algorithms look like counting on one's fingers. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to possess complete manufacturing specifications for technologies that most civilizations hadn't even begun to theorize. The gravitational manipulators alone, whispered Ambassador Thekmore, her crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated severe computational overload. Those could revolutionize planetary engineering for every spacefaring species in the known galaxy. And they're offering them for what amounts to samples and curiosities, added Director Kohlhaasen, his multifaceted eyes clicking rapidly as they process the implications. This isn't trade, this is charitable donation with extra steps. Captain Velterra had spent the last 15 minutes running economic projections through her ship's computers, and the results were causing her crew to gather around the tactical display with expressions of religious awe. The medical technology package they're offering for a single crate of Vorthack enhancement serum would make my family wealthy for the next 40 generations. This is beyond generous. It's economically impossible. The human hologram nodded with patient understanding. We realize our exchange rates might seem unusual by your standards. However, you must understand that we're not particularly interested in material wealth or technological advantage. We're collectors in our way. War Chief Greknell, who had been suspiciously quiet since his battle cruisers had been diplomatically humiliated, finally spoke up. Collectors of what? If not resources or power, what do you seek? Experiences, the human replied simply. Cultural artifacts, yes, but more importantly, perspectives. Your species have developed in isolation from each other, creating unique approaches to problems we solved centuries ago. We find your solutions charmingly inefficient, but genuinely creative. The assembled representatives exchanged glances that carried several layers of uncomfortable realization. You're treating us like a museum exhibit, Director Kohlhaasen said slowly. More like a particularly interesting archaeological site, the human corrected gently. One that's still actively producing artifacts. We're anthropologists, essentially, conducting field research on how civilizations develop when they're not given access to optimal solutions from the beginning. Counselor Ythander's translucent form shifted through colors, indicating deep philosophical unease. You've been watching us. For how long? The human's expression became thoughtful. Define watching. We've been aware of galactic civilization development for quite some time, but direct observation is a relatively recent development. We generally prefer to let cultures mature naturally before making contact. How recent? Admiral Korthes demanded. The holographic human checked what appeared to be a timepiece that probably cost more than most star systems. Oh, roughly 400 your standard years. Give or take a decade. We've been particularly fascinated by the Zen-3 expansion pattern and the Vorthack honor-based military structure. The Quillen commercial algorithms have been especially entertaining to observe. The silence that followed was filled with the sound of several civilizations simultaneously realizing they had been unknowingly performing for an audience that had been taking notes the entire time. Well, Zelinder said finally, her voice carrying the tone of someone who had decided that being studied by cosmic anthropologists was acceptable as long as they paid well. Shall we discuss delivery schedules? 3 days into what had become the most profitable and psychologically disturbing commercial venture in recorded galactic history, the human hologram made an announcement that caused Ambassador Thekmore to emit a sound her species had previously reserved for witnessing supernovas. Before we finalize these exchanges, the elderly human said, adjusting what appeared to be reading spectacles that probably contained more processing power than most planetary computer networks, I should probably mention that this will be our final collection expedition. The cargo bay of the joint trading station had been converted into a sort of interspecies marketplace, with representatives from dozens of civilizations arriving to gawk at humanity's impossible technologies and negotiate for scraps of knowledge that would advance their societies by centuries. The sudden announcement brought all activity to a halt that would have been comedic if it weren't so terrifying. Final, Captain Velterra managed, her voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their retirement fund evaporate in real time. The human's expression took on the wistful quality of someone reminiscing about a particularly pleasant vacation. Oh, yes, my colleagues and I are approaching our transition date. You see, we'll be joining the rest of humanity shortly. Director Cole Hassan's multifaceted eyes focused with laser precision. Joining them where exactly? Well, that's rather difficult to explain in terms your languages have developed vocabulary for, the human replied thoughtfully. Physical existence became optional for our species some time ago. Most of humanity moved beyond material reality several centuries back. We're essentially the last generation that still enjoys having bodies and piloting starships. The assembled representatives absorbed this information with the collective grace of a small moon colliding with a gas giant. You're telling us, War Chief Grecanel said slowly, his massive frame somehow managing to look small and confused, that the most advanced military vessel any of us have ever encountered is being operated by your species' equivalent of nostalgic retirees? The human chuckled with genuine warmth. Nostalgic is a bit strong. We prefer enthusiastic hobbyists. Building dreadnoughts and collecting cultural specimens has been our way of staying busy, while the Transcendence paperwork processed. Counselor Ythandra's translucent form cycled through colors indicating existential crisis. The Transcendence paperwork? Oh, it's quite bureaucratic. Even for post-physical beings, the human explained cheerfully. Lots of forms about consciousness transfer protocols and reality integration preferences. Frankly, touring the galaxy seemed more interesting than sitting in waiting rooms for the next few decades. Admiral Corthes had been running tactical calculations in his head, and the results were making him wish he'd chosen a different career. How many of you are there? On the ship, I mean... Currently, 17. Though Martha finished her transition yesterday. Lovely ceremony. Very touching. She's probably having tea with the collective consciousness of our Philosophers' Guild by now. The human paused to check her timepiece again. Actually, that reminds me. I should mention that this ship isn't exactly ours anymore. The marketplace fell silent, except for the sound of various respiratory systems processing panic. We've been broadcasting our collection expedition to the rest of humanity as a sort of documentary series. The human continued blithely. Quite popular, actually. The younger post-physical generations find your various species absolutely delightful. They're particularly fond of Vorthack military poetry and Quillen economic theory. Zalindra's business instincts finally overcame her shock. Popular enough to attract tourism? The human smile widened until it approached the boundaries of what facial expressions could reasonably achieve. Tourism is such a limited term. Let's call it cultural appreciation. The good news is that humanity has voted to establish a permanent observation station in this galactic sector. The better news is that we'll be implementing several infrastructure improvements to make commerce and communication more efficient for everyone involved. Infrastructure improvements? Ambassador Thekmore asked, her crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated her mathematical processing centers were approaching overload. Nothing too dramatic. Faster-than-light communication networks, standardized translation protocols, maybe some upgrades to your transportation systems. The post-physical beings get terribly impatient with slow data transfer rates. The human gestured casually, and a holographic display materialized showing architectural plans for structures that appear to treat the laws of physics as friendly suggestions. Director Cole Hassan stared at the schematics with the expression of someone whose worldview had just been fed through a particle accelerator. You're going to renovate our galaxy. Renovate implies something was wrong with it to begin with. The human corrected gently. Think of it more as interior decorating, with the occasional addition of impossible technologies and casual violations of thermodynamics. Captain Velterra had spent her entire career learning to recognize opportunity in its various disguises, but this was pushing the boundaries of her expertise. And the rest of us? What happens to our civilizations when you turn our galaxy into humanity's cultural preservation project? The human's expression took on the sort of infinite patience typically reserved for explaining complex concepts to enthusiastic but confused students. You continue being yourselves, of course. That's the entire point. We're not here to change you. We're here to make sure you have the best possible conditions to keep developing in your own wonderfully inefficient ways. The assembled representatives exchanged glances that carried the weight of species-wide existential recalibration. So, War Chief Gretinale said finally, we're going to be the galaxy's first interstellar nature preserve. With premium amenities and excellent customer service, the human added brightly. And somewhere in the vast spaces between stars, the rest of humanity settled in to watch their new neighbors with the fond attention of gardeners tending to a particularly interesting collection of flowers. Flowers that had just discovered they were growing in the most exclusive botanical garden in the universe. The galaxy had spent millennia wondering if they were alone in the cosmos. As it turned out, they had been living in humanity's backyard the entire time.